My in-laws tried to take my baby from the hospital because they said I was unprepared, and now everyone is acting like I overreacted by calling security. My name is Maya. My in-laws, Gary and Linda, are wealthy. They aren't just comfortable. They live in a reality where money solves every inconvenience, and people who can't pay their way out of problems are viewed as morally failing. They live in a gated community that requires a QR code just to drive down the street, and they view anyone who doesn't live in a similar zip code as a failure. My husband, Mark, and I are normal. We rent a 2-bedroom apartment in the city, we budget for groceries, and we drive a Honda that's 7 years old. To Gary and Linda, this means we are destitute. They've been writing me my entire pregnancy about how unprepared we are. It started small, comments about the neighborhood safety, asking if we had a college fund fully funded yet, but it escalated when we set up the nursery. We converted the 2nd bedroom, which used to be our office. We painted it a soft sage green and bought a solid wood crib from a regular furniture store. When Linda saw it, she actually covered her mouth. She asked where the night nurse was going to sleep. When I told her we weren't hiring a night nurse, she looked at me like I said we were planning to feed the baby gravel. She told me I needed professional help because sleep deprivation leads to mistakes, and they didn't want accidents. Mark always brushes it off. He has this way of shrinking around them, making himself small so he doesn't become a target. He tells me I'm too sensitive, that they just have high standards because they care. He claims they mean well and just worry too much. Well, I went into labor early, 2 days ago. It was chaotic. Mark was at work 40 minutes away. I had to Uber to the ER while contracting every 4 minutes. It was terrifying. Chloe arrived 3 weeks early, small, just under 6 pounds, but healthy. I, on the other hand, had a rough time. I hemorrhaged after the delivery and my blood pressure tanked. I'm weak, anemic, and currently hooked up to 2 different 4 bags. Here's where it went off the rails. Yesterday morning, the hospital room was quiet. Mark had stepped out to the cafeteria to get coffee because he'd been up all night. It was just me, unable to even sit up without the room spinning, and Chloe sleeping in the clear plastic bassinet next to my bed. The door swung open without a knock. Gary and Linda walked in. Visiting hours hadn't even technically started, but they have that specific kind of rich person entitlement that makes people hold doors open for them. They must have bullied past the nurse's station. Linda was wearing a white cashmere coat. In a hospital, she didn't even look at me. She walked straight to the bassinet, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor. She stared down at Chloe with a frown, like she was inspecting a piece of produce at the market. She finally acknowledged me by commenting on how small Chloe was. She didn't say hello. She just asked if the baby was receiving adequate nutrition because I looked ghastly. She asked if I was sure my milk was rich enough. I tried to push myself up on my elbows, but my head swam. I told her the doctor said Chloe was doing great, just a little early. Gary was standing by the door. He didn't come in fully. He stood with his arms crossed, scanning the room. He looked at the force stand, the monitors, the pile of blankets at the foot of the bed. He demanded to know if we had a night nurse scheduled for when we went home. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. I told him no. I explained that Mark and I were taking shifts and had it covered. They exchanged a look. It was a heavy, loaded look, the kind of look people exchange when they've decided something unpleasant needs to be done. Linda turned her back to the baby to face me. Her voice took on that cloying, fake sweet tone she uses when she's about to insult me. She said they had been discussing this situation. She told me that given our living conditions and my current physical state, they didn't feel it was safe for Chloe to go home with us just yet. My brain felt foggy from the pain meds. I blinked at her, asking her to repeat that. Gary stated matter-of-factly that they had set up the nursery at their house. He said they hired a fully certified night nurse and a lactation consultant who would live in. He announced they would be taking Chloe for the first 6 months. He added that I could visit, of course, once I had recovered. I let out a dry, disbelief-filled laugh. I told Linda she was funny, but I needed water because my throat was dry. Linda didn't move. She reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. She tapped the folder against her palm. She said their lawyer drew up a temporary guardianship agreement. She claimed it was just a formality to ensure they could authorize medical care while she was staying with them. She said Mark wouldn't have to worry about the bills or the stress, and that it was best for the family. The air left the room. My heart started hammering against my ribs, setting off the monitor's alarm bells. Beep, beep, beep. I whispered for them to get out. Gary stepped forward, his voice dropping an octave. He told me not to be hysterical. He pointed out that I couldn't even sit up without wincing. He asked how I planned to care for a preemie in that cramped apartment. He called it neglectful to even suggest it. I snapped back, my voice rising. The adrenaline was cutting through the exhaustion. I told him she wasn't a preemie, just early term. I told him she was my daughter and they weren't taking her. Linda sighed, looking at Gary like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. She said they weren't asking. She said they were doing what was necessary. She turned back to the bassinet. She reached in. That's when I lost it. I screamed at her not to touch my baby. Linda ignored me. She scooped Chloe up, my daughter, who had been sleeping peacefully, started to wail. It was a thin, piercing cry that made my milk let down instantly. I tried to lunge out of the bed. I forgot about the catheter. I forgot about the four. I jerked forward and pain ripped through my midsection so hard I saw white spots. The four-pole rattled and nearly tipped over. I gasped, clutching my stomach, and yelled for her to put the baby down. Linda hissed that I was scaring the baby. She clutched Chloe to her chest and turned toward the door. Gary opened it wide. He held it for her. They were leaving. They were actually walking out of the room with my baby. I screamed at the top of my lungs, a primal, animal noise. I yelled for security. I yelled that they were stealing my baby. The hallway erupted. Nurses flooded the room. A doctor I hadn't seen before ran in. 2 security guards in yellow vests appeared right behind them. I was sobbing, hysterical, pointing a shaking finger at Linda, who was standing in the doorway looking shocked that I had actually caused a scene. Mark came running in from the hallway, a coffee cup in each hand. He stopped dead, looking between me screaming in the bed and his mother holding our screaming child. I shrieked that she was trying to kidnap Chloe and told someone to stop her. The security guards blocked the doorway. Gary tried to step between them and Linda, puffing out his chest. He shouted about who he was. He yelled that he was the grandfather and they were taking her to a private facility. The guards didn't care. One of them, a big guy with a shaved head, put a hand on Gary's chest and pushed him back. He ordered Gary to step back and told Linda to put the child back in the bassinet immediately. Linda looked at Mark, eyes wide. She demanded Mark tell them they were helping. Mark looked paralyzed. He looked at me, sweating and bleeding in the bed. He looked at his mother. He finally whispered for her to put Chloe back. Linda scoffed, an ugly sound, and marched back to the bassinet, dumping Chloe in a little too roughly. The guard immediately stepped between her and the baby. Here is the problem. Here is why I'm writing this terrified. Mark is mad at me. After security escorted his parents out, they weren't arrested, just removed from the floor. Mark came back into the room. I was being checked by the nurses, crying my eyes out, holding Chloe's hand. Mark didn't hug me. He didn't check on Chloe. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. He told me I humiliated them. His voice was tight. I stared at him. I told him they were walking out the door with a folder. I reminded him they said 6 months. Mark snapped that I hallucinated that part. He said he talked to his dad in the hall. Gary told him they just wanted to hold the baby and I started screaming. Gary claimed the folder was just estate planning stuff for her trust fund. Mark insisted I was on heavy painkillers and misunderstood everything. I yelled that I didn't misunderstand. I told him Linda specifically used the word guardianship and called our apartment neglectful. Mark shouted back that they were offering to babysit. He said they just wanted to help because I was almost dying in the bed. He accused me of calling security on them like they were criminals. He asked if I knew how embarrassing that was. He told me his dad was threatening to cut off the payments for his student loans because I treated them like kidnappers. He thinks I'm crazy. He thinks the hormones and the blood loss made me paranoid. He's currently on the phone with his sister in the hallway, and I can hear him using words like psychotic break and totally irrational. I asked the nurse about the folder Linda had. It's gone. She took it with her when she left. I have no proof. I've asked the charge nurse to put a ban on Gary and Linda visiting. Mark is furious about it. He says I'm destroying the family over a misunderstanding. But I know the look on Gary's face when he opened that door. He wasn't holding the door for a grandmother taking a baby for a stroll. He was holding the door for a getaway. Update 2 days later. I wish I could say things have calmed down, but the last 48 hours have been a slow-motion car crash. Mark is still treating me like I'm a fragile, confused invalid. He spent the night in the hospital chair, but he barely spoke to me. Every time I tried to bring up the folder or the guardianship papers, he'd sigh that heavy, disappointed sigh and tell me to stop. He kept repeating that I lost a lot of blood and was confused. He insisted his mom just wanted to help and that I know she oversteps, but she wasn't kidnapping our child. He made me feel so small. I lay there in the dark listening to the hospital machines beep, and I actually started doubting myself. Maybe I did mishear. Maybe guardianship was a word my panicked brain supplied. Maybe I am the villain here. But then the hospital social worker, Sarah, saved my sanity. She came in yesterday morning while Mark was in the bathroom showering. She closed the door quietly and sat by my bed. She had a notebook in her lap. Sarah told me she wanted to check in regarding the incident with the grandparents. Her voice was low and serious. She said the security report noted that the grandmother was attempting to leave the unit with the infant while I was shouting for help. She asked if that was correct. I told her yes. I told her, with my voice trembling, that they said they were taking her for 6 months and had papers. Sarah nodded slowly. She wrote something down. She told me they take this very seriously. She said she spoke to the security guards herself. One of them mentioned that Gary was shouting about legal rights. He specifically heard Gary threaten the guard, saying they had custody arrangements pending and that the hospital would be sued if they interfered. I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost threw up. Tears pricked my eyes. I asked her if he really heard it, confirming I didn't imagine it. Sarah confirmed I didn't. She looked me dead in the eye. She told me they had flagged my file. She said my in-laws were blacklisted from the maternity ward. And then she dropped the bomb. She said based on what the nurses observed of Mark's reaction, siding with the individuals attempting to remove the child rather than the distressed mother, they wanted to ensure I felt safe going home with him. That hit me hard. The hospital staff was worried about Mark's complicity. A stranger saw what my own husband refused to see. Mark came out of the bathroom then, toweling off his hair. Sarah stood up, put on a professional smile, and gave me a card, telling me to call her if I needed anything. I didn't tell Mark what Sarah said. I just watched him. He was texting constantly. He wouldn't show me his screen. Later that afternoon, I was finally discharged. Mark drove us home in silence. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. I sat in the back with Chloe, staring at the back of his head, wondering who this man was. When we got to our apartment, the vibe was off immediately. There were cardboard boxes in the hallway. I asked what they were while shifting Chloe in her car seat. Mark mumbled something about his mom sending over essentials to help out. He avoided my eyes as he unlocked the door. I walked into the living room. It wasn't just stuff. Our living room was transformed. There were stacks of diapers, boxes of high-end formula, I'm breastfeeding, and clothes, but the worst part was the nursery. I walked past the open door of our carefully painted sage green room. It was gone. Our crib, the one we picked out together, was dismantled and leaning against the wall. In its place was a massive, ornate, white bassinet with gold trim. The changing table we bought was covered with a new, sterile-looking white pad, and sitting on our sofa in the living room was a woman. She stood up when we entered. She was wearing teal scrubs. I asked who she was, my blood running cold. Mark rushed to cut me off. He put a hand on my back, guiding me further into the room. He introduced her as Brenda. He said his parents paid for a night nurse for 2 weeks as a peace offering to show they wanted to support us since I wouldn't let them take Chloe to their house. I looked at Brenda. She looked nice enough, but she was a stranger in my house, a stranger they paid for. I told Brenda to get out. Brenda looked uncomfortable. She looked at Mark and started to say Mr. Harrison had hired her. I interrupted her. I told her I didn't care what he said. This was my house, and she needed to leave. Mark grabbed my arm, gently, but firm enough to stop me. He told me to stop being unreasonable. He said we were tired and needed help. He asked why I was rejecting a free professional nurse and if I had any idea how much it cost. I pulled my arm away and yelled that I didn't care. I told him I didn't trust them. I screamed at him that they tried to take our baby and asked why he didn't believe me. Mark exploded. His face turned red. He shouted that it made no sense. He yelled that they were his parents and they loved us. He accused me of embarrassing them publicly while they were still trying to help. He told me to get over my insecurity about our money situation and stop being selfish. We got into a screaming match right there in the living room. Chloe started crying. Brenda awkwardly gathered her bag and saw herself out, leaving the expensive gear behind. Mark stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. I locked the front door. Then I took Chloe into the nursery, our nursery, or what was left of it, and moved the fancy bassinet into the corner. I set up the pack-and-play we had for travel. I locked the nursery door and sat in the rocking chair, terrified to fall asleep. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. I jumped. It was a text from an unknown number. Check under the passenger seat of Mark's car. I stared at the screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I didn't know who sent it. I waited until I heard Mark snoring loudly through the wall. I put Chloe in the pack-and-play and turned on the baby monitor, carrying the receiver with me. I grabbed my keys and crept out of the apartment, down the stairs to the parking lot. The night air was cold. I unlocked Mark's SUV and opened the passenger door. I reached under the seat. My hand brushed against thick, cold paper. I pulled out a manila folder. It was the folder Linda had at the hospital. I opened it under the dome light. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. It wasn't just a temporary guardianship agreement. It was a drafted legal petition. Petition for emergency custody ex parte. I flipped through the pages. It was a nightmare. It listed parental incapacity and unsafe living environment as the reasons. It listed our apartment square footage as a health hazard. It cited Mark's student loan debt as proof of financial instability. It had bullet points about my anemia and history of anxiety. I saw a counselor in college for final stress. How did they know that? And at the bottom of the petition, dated 3 days before I even gave birth, Mark's signature. He hadn't signed the final affidavit, but he had signed a consent to review document. It gave his parents' lawyers access to our financials and medical records. He knew. He might not have known they were going to snatch her at the hospital, but he knew they were building a case. He helped them build it. He gave them the ammo. I threw up right there in the parking lot, just opened the car door and retched onto the asphalt. I took the folder. I went back upstairs. I didn't go back to sleep. I packed a bag for me and Chloe. I grabbed our important documents, passports, birth certificates, social security cards. Mark was still asleep. I called my brother, Dave. Dave lives 3 hours away. He's a mechanic, a big guy covered in tattoos who drives a beat-up truck and takes absolutely no nonsense. I told him everything. Dave told me he was leaving right then. His voice was calm, which is how I knew he was furious. He told me to lock the door and put a chair under the handle. He said he would be there by 6 a.m. I'm sitting in the living room now. The sun is just coming up. The folder is in my lap. Mark just walked out of the bedroom, yawning, scratching his stomach. He saw the bags. He saw the folder. His face went completely white. He stammered my name. He said he could explain. I looked at him. I told him not to speak. I told him if he came near me or Chloe before Dave got there, I would call the police and show them the folder. He's sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands. He looks terrified. Good. I'm leaving as soon as Dave gets here. I don't know if I'm coming back. Update 5 days later. I am writing this from the guest room of my brother Dave's house. I am safe. Chloe is safe. And the locks on my apartment have been changed. Not that I'm there to see it. The confrontation with Mark before I left was explosive. After I told him not to speak, the silence lasted about 10 minutes before he cracked. He started crying, ugly, heaving sobs, begging me to listen. He claimed he didn't know it was a custody petition. He said his parents told him it was just estate planning so Chloe could be added to their trust fund immediately. He claimed he signed the papers without reading them thoroughly because he trusts his father. He kept blubbering, wiping snot on his sleeve, insisting he didn't know they were trying to take her. He said he thought they were just setting up a savings account and reminded me he doesn't understand legal stuff like that. I opened the folder and read the header aloud. I told him coldly that he has a master's degree and knows what the word custody means. I told him he isn't stupid, just a coward. When Dave arrived, he didn't even knock. He used the spare key I gave him years ago and walked in like a storm. Dave is 6 feet 4 inches and smells like motor oil and cigarettes. Mark shrank into his chair. Dave didn't say a word to Mark. He just picked up my bags, took the car seat carrier from me, and walked us out. As we were leaving, Mark tried to stand up and begged me to wait. Dave turned around. He didn't shout. He just pointed a finger at Mark's chest. He told Mark that if he followed us, they were going to have a problem that his daddy's money couldn't fix. Mark stayed put. The ride to Dave's was quiet. I spent most of it reading the rest of the file. It was worse than I thought. They had photos of our apartment, photos taken from inside. Mark must have sent them. They had highlighted hazards like a loose rug in the hallway and the fact that our windows are older. They had a printed copy of my credit report, which isn't even bad, just average. They were building a case that we were destitute and living in squalor. Once we settled in at Dave's, I called a family law attorney my brother recommended. Her name is Janice, and she is a shark. I sent her scans of everything in the folder. Janice called me back within the hour. She told me it was aggressive, but the fact that they tried to physically remove the child from the hospital before a judge even saw the petition worked in my favor. She noted that Mark signing a preliminary consent form was complicated. She advised me to file for an emergency protective order against Gary and Linda, and to file for divorce immediately to establish a custody baseline before they could file their petition. I texted Mark telling him I was filing for divorce and not to contact me unless it was through my lawyer. His response was a barrage of texts. He begged me not to do it. He said his parents were going to destroy us if I fought them. He claimed he could fix it and had told them to back off. He insisted they just wanted what was best for Chloe. He said we couldn't afford a legal battle and warned me they were threatening to sue for grandparent rights. I blocked him. Then, yesterday, things escalated. I was alone at Dave's house while he was at work. His wife, Sarah, yes, same name as the social worker, confusing I know, was out grocery shopping. A black sedan pulled up into the driveway. It was Gary. I have no idea how he found out where Dave lives. Mark must have told him. He didn't come to the door. He just stood by his car at the end of the driveway, staring at the house. It was intimidating. He took out his phone and started filming. Dave's house is comfortable but lived in. There are car parts in the yard because he works from home sometimes, and the grass is a little long. Gary was documenting it. He was gathering evidence for the unsafe environment argument. I called Dave immediately, hiding behind the curtains. I told him Gary was there. Dave said he was 5 minutes away and told me not to open the door. I watched through the window. Gary walked up the driveway a bit, filming the oil stain on the concrete. He looked disgusted. Then I heard the roar of Dave's truck. He came down the street fast. He pulled right up to the bumper of the sedan, blocking Gary in. I saw Dave get out. He had a tire iron in his hand. He wasn't raising it, just holding it casually by his side, tapping it against his thigh. Gary scrambled back into his car. He locked the doors. Dave walked up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass with the iron. Clink, clink. He said something. I couldn't hear it through the glass, but I saw Gary's face go pale. Dave stepped back and moved his truck just enough for Gary to reverse. Gary peeled out of there so fast he left black skid marks on the pavement. Dave came inside, looking grim. He tossed the tire iron on the table. He told me Gary said I was keeping his granddaughter in a junkyard. He said Gary claimed they already had a judge sign an emergency order and the police were coming to get her. My heart stopped. I asked if he really said that. Dave confirmed it. I panicked. I called Janice. She checked the court docket online. She told me there was nothing filed yet. She said he was bluffing to scare me into handing her over, but she said we needed to move fast. She filed my petition for sole custody ex parte, without the other party present, that afternoon based on the hospital incident and the stalking. That night, my phone started blowing up from numbers I didn't recognize, flying monkeys, relatives of Mark's I've met maybe twice. They messaged asking how I could keep a father from his child. They said Gary and Linda were devastated and I was being cruel. They told me I knew I couldn't provide for the baby like they could and called me selfish. They are controlling the narrative. They're telling everyone I kidnapped Chloe and fled across state lines. I didn't. Dave lives in the same state. But the real kicker, Mark sent an email to my old work address since I blocked his phone. The subject was please read. He wrote that his parents were willing to drop the custody suit if I agreed to move into the guest house on their property for the first year. He said they would pay for everything and we could be a family. He begged me to agree, saying they had lawyers who cost $1,000 an hour and we would lose. He told me to just do what they wanted. He's not fighting for me, he's negotiating my surrender. I replied with one sentence. I told him I would rather live in a box than let those people raise my daughter. I have a court hearing in 2 days. Janice says it's going to be a bloodbath. Update 3 months later. I know it's been a while. I honestly didn't know if I would ever be able to write this update. The last 3 months have been the hardest of my life. I've lost 15 pounds from stress. I barely sleep, and every time a car slows down outside, I jump. First, the court hearing. It was brutal. Gary and Linda showed up with a legal team of 3 attorneys. They wore matching gray suits. Mark was there, sitting behind them, looking like a beaten dog. He wouldn't even look at me. Their lawyers painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable. They claimed I had a history of mental instability. They brought up the college counseling. They claimed I was living in a dangerous industrial environment, Dave's house. They brought up the hospital incident and spun it completely around. They claimed I was the one acting erratic at the hospital, that I was delirious from drugs, and that Linda was simply trying to comfort the baby while I screamed. They had an affidavit from a nurse, one I don't remember meeting, who stated I was aggressive and confused. I felt like I was drowning. My lawyer, Janice, was good, but they were suffocating us with paperwork and objections. But then, the turning point. Janice called the hospital security guard to the stand, the one Gary threatened. He was an older guy, named Officer Miller. He looked annoyed to be there, but he was honest. He testified that he heard Gary say, "We're taking her, we have rights," and specifically confirmed that Linda had the baby in her arms near the door while I was bedbound. Then Janice played the security footage from the hallway. It didn't show inside the room, but it showed Gary and Linda entering. Crucially, it showed Linda hiding the folder under her coat as they left after being kicked out. It showed her shoving it deep into her bag. And it showed Mark. It showed Mark standing there in the hallway, watching his parents being escorted out. He didn't look concerned for me. He looked annoyed. He was checking his watch. The judge, a stern woman with glasses who looked like she had zero patience for rich people drama, stared at Mark. She asked Mr. Harrison if he signed a consent form allowing his parents to investigate his wife's fitness as a mother prior to the birth. Mark stood up, shaking. He tried to say he thought it was for a trust fund. The judge snapped at him to answer the question. He whispered yes. She asked if he informed his wife of this. He said no. The judge looked at Gary and Linda. She stated that the court found the behavior of the paternal grandparents to be predatory and deeply disturbing. She denied the petition for emergency custody with prejudice. She granted me full temporary physical custody. Mark was granted supervised visitation only, and Gary and Linda were slapped with a 5-year restraining order protecting both me and Chloe. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Mark didn't take the supervised visitation. He didn't even try. Instead, he spiraled. 2 weeks after the hearing, I got a call from the police. Mark had been arrested. He had gotten drunk, blackout drunk, and driven his car through the front gates of his parents' estate. He caused about $50,000 in damage. When the police arrived, he was screaming that they ruined his life. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant. He made his bed. Gary and Linda, true to form, bailed him out but then immediately cut him off. They kicked him out of their lives because he embarrassed them publicly. The golden child was suddenly tarnished, so they threw him away. They froze his accounts. They took the car back. Mark showed up at Dave's house a week later. He looked terrible, unshaven, skinny, shaking. He was wearing dirty clothes. Dave met him at the end of the driveway. I watched from the porch, holding Chloe. Mark yelled at me from the street that he had nowhere to go. He said they took everything. He explained the apartment lease was in his dad's name as a guarantor and he canceled it. He said they fired him from the firm. He screamed that he had nothing. I told him his choices led him here. I reminded him he picked them over us every single time. I reminded him he signed the papers. He cried that he was scared of them. He yelled that I didn't know what they were like. I told him I did know, and that was why I left. I pointed out that he stayed. Dave told him to leave. Mark looked at me one last time, looking at Chloe, and then walked away. He didn't even have a car. He walked down the road to the bus stop. I filed for divorce. It was finalized last week. Since Mark has no income and no assets, I didn't get child support, but I got what matters, sole legal and physical custody. I'm still living with Dave and Sarah, but I'm getting back on my feet. I found a remote job doing data entry I can do while watching Chloe. She's getting chubby and has the cutest laugh. But here is the twist I didn't see coming. Yesterday, I received a package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a thick envelope and a USB drive. I plugged the drive into an old laptop, disconnected from the internet, just in case. It was an audio recording. It was a recording of a conversation between Gary and Linda. The date stamp was from 4 months ago, when I was 7 months pregnant. I heard Gary's voice. He was saying the lawyer told them if they could prove I was incompetent, they could bypass the waiting period. Then Linda spoke. She said I was incompetent by nature. She commented on where I came from, but she said Mark was the problem because he was too attached to me. Gary said they would handle Mark. He said once they had the baby, Mark would fall in line because he always does. He said if he didn't, they would cut the trust, and he wouldn't last a week without the stipend. Then Linda said the part that haunts me. She said she just wanted that baby. She said Chloe was going to be perfect. She said they could fix the genetic damage from the mother's side with proper schooling. I felt sick listening to it. Genetic damage, like I was a defect to be bred out. I looked at the papers in the envelope. It was a letter from Mark. He wrote that he recorded it on his phone when he left the room to get coffee that day we visited them for dinner. He said he forgot he had it until now. He admitted he was too scared to listen to it. He apologized for being weak. He apologized for letting them treat me like an incubator. He told me to use it if they ever tried to come after me again because it proved premeditation. He knew. He might have been in denial, but deep down, he knew they were planning a coup, and he handed me the smoking gun. I sent the recording to Janice. She said this guarantees they will never, ever get near Chloe. Final update 1 year later. I am writing this on Chloe's first birthday. She is smashing a cake I baked. It's messy, it's lopsided, and it's perfect, all over her face. We have our own apartment now, a small place with a garden, about 20 minutes from Dave's house. It's not a mansion, but it's ours. I thought the drama was done, I really did, but the universe, or rather, my former in-laws, had one last act. About 6 months ago, I started noticing a car parked down the street from my new place, different cars, actually, but the same behavior, sitting there for hours. I was paranoid. I called the police, but since they were on public property, there wasn't much they could do. I assumed Gary hired PIs to watch me, waiting for me to slip up. Then, 3 months ago, the news broke. Gary Harrison was indicted for embezzlement and fraud. It was all over the local papers. Apparently, Gary's wealth wasn't just old money. It was a massive, decades-long Ponzi scheme. He had been cooking the books of his investment firm to maintain their lifestyle. He had been robbing his clients blind. And guess who turned him in? The anonymous whistleblower wasn't named in the press, but I knew. I got a postcard in the mail a week after the arrest. It was postmarked from a town in Oregon. It had no message, just a picture of a lighthouse, but the handwriting on the address was unmistakable. It was Mark's. He finally stood up to them. He didn't do it to save me, or to save himself. He did it to burn their kingdom down. I later found out from Dave, who heard it from a buddy in the police force, that when Mark's parents cut him off, he didn't just leave. Before he walked out of their estate that night he got bailed out. He went into Gary's home office. He took the hard drives. He took the ledgers. He took a few watches and some cash from the safe he knew the combination to. He used the cash to get to Oregon. He used the hard drives to destroy them. With Gary's assets frozen and facing federal prison, the expensive lawyers vanished. Linda is apparently living with her sister in a trailer park because the estate was seized. I haven't replied to the postcard. I don't plan to. Mark doing the right thing one time doesn't erase the trauma he allowed to happen. He's still the man who signed a paper to let his parents evaluate my fitness as a mother. He's still the man who watched them try to walk out of a hospital with our newborn. But knowing he's out there, somewhere far away, and that he finally cut the cord, it gives me a tiny bit of peace. Yesterday, Linda tried to call me. I don't know how she got my number. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it once. She sounded drunk. She was crying, rambling about how she misses her granddaughter, how she has nothing left, how she just wanted to give Chloe a better life. She sobbed that she just wanted her to be a Harrison. She said they were special. She said they were important. I deleted the voicemail. Chloe isn't a Harrison. I changed her last name to mine as soon as the divorce was final. She's walking now. She's saying mama and dog and no. She is fierce and funny and kind. Today, Dave and Sarah came over for the party. Dave gave Chloe a toy truck. Sarah gave her a doll. We sat in the garden and ate cake. I looked at my daughter, covered in frosting, laughing at a butterfly. She doesn't have a trust fund, she won't go to a Swiss boarding school, she won't be presented as a debutante. She has a mother who fought for her, she has an uncle who threatened a millionaire with a tire iron for her, she is loved. I grabbed a napkin and started wiping the pink frosting off her cheeks. She giggled and grabbed my nose. We made it.